The Black Pit. Most of my cases come from rural areas. Small, tight-knit communities where legends take a life of their own. They are typically situated near the woods or mountains, as old entities prefer staying close to nature. And so it was for the Black Pit, which was found in a cave a couple of miles north of the town. I knew this case was going to be trouble when I received its file. Usually when I'm given a case to investigate, I'm sent a dossier with some basic information. Here there was nothing useful contained in any of the documents, nothing about rules, or any murders or disappearances, or even anything supernatural. All I got was the name of the town, its location, and some tidbits about local history and the makeup of the community. My suspicions were confirmed when I reached the town and found that no one was willing to talk to me. People seemed to be on edge, breathing, walking, or speaking faster than they needed to, as if they had somewhere to be, something to do. This nervousness would quickly morph into naked hostility every time I tried asking them about the town, about whatever was clearly haunting them. I had people from the sheriff's department try to run me out of town, but that was the only significant thing to have happened. And so it was that even after being there for a couple of days, I had learned absolutely nothing about the town. Perhaps the most disturbing part of it all was that things seemed so terrifyingly normal. They had no weird rules or rituals that they visibly followed. People were still out at night, jogging, going to restaurants, just doing normal stuff, albeit with fear and anxiety writ clear on their faces. It was getting to be frustrating for me, because not knowing things, not being in control, really peeves me like nothing else. I was forced to discreetly set up cameras around the town, but not even they picked up anything that would set alarm bells ringing. I had reached a point where I was willing to call my employers and ask them if they'd made a mistake and maybe even call it quits, because there seemed to be nothing wrong with this place, apart from the oddly nervous townspeople. I wondered how people at the company came to know about this place. But then I hit the jackpot one night. I was dozing in front of my laptop when I noticed movement out of half-shut eyes. I jerked upright and saw that a bunch of people were rushing out of their houses and scrambling for their cars. I grabbed my jacket and my laptop, shoved the pistol in its holster, and raced to my car. Keeping a safe distance from their cars and regularly peeking at my laptop, I tailed them with my headlights switched off to avoid being spotted. I followed them all the way out of town as they turned onto a dirt track and drove off into the hills. There were at least half a dozen vehicles, moving like a loose convoy with about 1 to 2 people in each. I watched as they came to a halt near the bottom of a steep cliff, their headlights lighting up the jagged rock wall. They then proceeded to climb out of their vehicles and disappeared into the cliffside. I blinked and realized there must have been a cave somewhere in the hill, hidden from my line of sight. I jumped out of my car, dashed to the trunk, and pulled out my AR. Slinging the rifle strap around my shoulder, I began jogging towards the cave. The entrance was small, with there being just enough space for 4 people to walk side by side. As I stepped in, I noticed that the cave took a sharp left turn before descending at a gentle incline. I could hear sounds of footsteps and agitated conversations drifting up towards me, so I slowed down, not wanting to suddenly come up on them and potentially get into a fight. After walking down the curving path for about 15 minutes, I turned right and reached a cavernous chamber with a hole in the floor at the center. The people from the town were standing in a circle close to it, their flashlights bobbing as they shouted at each other. I ducked left and hid behind a pillar, then strained my ears to understand their echoing voices. "Hurry up, Morgan. We need to get this done quick." I poked my head out and saw a group's attention was focused on 2 people amongst them. 2 men with about 30 years of an age gap between them. The younger of the 2 replied, I know. Let me just say goodbye to my dad." "You should have already done that. We don't have a lot of time to F around. Just give me a minute here. Hurry up, because if you can't do it, I will." I will, alright? Just give me some effing privacy. With that, the group split up and most of them began shuffling back the way they had come, leaving behind the father-son duo. I shifted away from the entrance to avoid being seen by those leaving the cave. The two who were left began speaking when they felt they had enough privacy to do so. It's okay, son. This has to be done. The father puts his hands on his son's shoulders to comfort him. Dad, the son's voice cracked. No, I can't do this. You have to, the father replied, with a hint of admonishment in his tone. For our family, for the town, it has to be done, the son sobbed. I've lived a good life, son. No regrets. Now I just want to be with your mother. Understand? The son nodded, wiping tears off his face. Attaboy. The son opened the zip of his jacket, put his hand in and pulled out a pistol. I love you, Dad. He pressed the gun against his father's chest. I love you too, son. I switched on the flashlight mounted beneath the barrel of my gun, stepped out from my hiding spot and walked towards the two. Drop the weapon, or I will fire on you. The son jumped, startled, and whirled around to look at me. He blinked as my flashlight blinded him. Drop it. Now. The father was the first to get over the shock. Who's that? Is that you, Rick? What are you doing here? I told you we'd get it done. Drop the effing gun, I warned again. The son started to bring his pistol up, so I shot him in the leg. The gunshot rang deafeningly loud, causing the father to cover his ears with his hands. But the son dropped the gun and collapsed with a grunt. The father cried out in horror and moved towards his son, so I put a bullet in his leg too for good measure. The two didn't resist much as I dragged them to a corner, choosing instead to spend their energy moaning in pain. I'd have waited for them to get used to it. So you guys mind telling me what the F you're doing here? Who are you? The father demanded, gritting his teeth and pressing down on the wound in his leg. I clicked my tongue. I'm the one asking the questions here. Again, what are you doing here? He ignored my question. You're the outsider, aren't you? Why did you stop us? Do you even know what you've done? Do you have any idea what'll happen if we don't do what we need to do? Dad, the son groaned. No, I don't, I replied. But I really want to know, so why don't you tell me? He glared at me hatefully. Well, get on with it, I prodded him. Or do you not understand the situation you're in right now? I pointed at my rifle. We're not supposed to tell you anything. I'm sure breaking that promise is better than watching your son's head get blown the F out right now, right in front of you, isn't it? He snarled at me, but after taking a couple of seconds to calm himself down, he told me the story. And that is how I found out about the Black Pit, and the one rule associated with it. Apparently, the little dark hole behind me housed a powerful primordial entity, and the people from this town had been sacrificing one of their own every month for years and feeding it to the corpse to sate its greed. And failure to do so on a night like this would inevitably lead to death and destruction, as would any attempts to run from it all. In fact, the father here had killed his wife and his own father to placate the monstrosity, and now his son was going to continue that effed up tradition. Not if I had anything to say about it. I was at a crossroads. I had to quickly take a decision on how to proceed from there on. The people outside may have thought the gunshots and the screams were parts of the sacrifice, but they were bound to get suspicious if the son didn't go outside. I thought that maybe I could drag these two away from here, but that wasn't feasible. Those on the outside could easily catch up to us. Or worse comes to worse, they could just sacrifice someone else. No. If I wanted to break the rule, I had to make sure no one died and fell into the pit that night. I decided to make a stand in the cave itself. After muttering a heartfelt apology to the two, I shot them in their good legs, applied makeshift first aid, and tied them with belts and torn t-shirts, and prayed that the blood loss doesn't kill them before the night was over. The father said that the one killed had to be tossed into the pit to complete the sacrifice. But I wasn't willing to take that chance. Sweat poured down my forehead, and my heart pounded in my chest. Every second wasted there was a second that allowed doubt and suspicion to develop in the minds of the others. I did not want to get caught with my pants down in that open space. The narrow cave entrance provided the best opportunity to hold them back. Compounding all that was the fear of the pit itself. What in the F was I going to unleash by breaking that rule? Could it be another aberration? Was I ready to take care of whatever crawled out of that hole? Angry and hungry? I didn't even have time to think that maybe I'd made the wrong decision. That maybe I should have just called for backup and waited this out. Things had progressed at a pace much faster than I was comfortable with. F it. I thought no sense in doubting myself in the middle of all that. After stealing the sun's weapon, I bolted towards the entrance and found that my suspicions were indeed correct. They were beginning to move back inside. I took cover behind the wall as it turned left, took a deep breath, popped out, and shot the first one in the kneecap. He screamed as blood exploded from his knee and went down, causing the others around him to shout in shock. I fired again, catching a couple more in the legs and shoulders. Thankfully, I had been doing this long enough to know how to avoid lethal wounds. What the F, Morgan? What do you think you're doing? I shot at the one that screamed at me. The bullet whistling past his thigh. The one with the busted kneecap crawled out of my line of sight, allowing me to put some more suppressing fire down. It didn't take them long to regroup, and I was soon dealing with bullets flying past my head and slamming into the cave wall behind me, showering me with debris. A horrible thought crossed my mind, and I saw the cave's roof collapsing in on me, trapping me inside. I shook my head and focused on the positives. I had geographical advantage. I just had to hold them off until the time limit of the sacrifice ended, and the monster crawled out of the hole to find me without ammunition, surrounded by angry townspeople. I laughed at my seemingly hopeless predicament and fired again, taking care not to waste my shots. And so our long night standoff began. I had always heard of shootouts that lasted for hours, but this was my first time experiencing it. Thankfully, they were far less experienced than I was, and soon I was dealing only with a couple of them, the others have been wounded long ago. But then reinforcements showed up, and I fought them off too. I had to admire their tenacity. Even after seeing most of their people get injured, they continued to fight, firing until the gunshots made my ears ring. They tried many tricks as the night went on, tried to blind me with the headlights of their cars, but I shot them off. Got the sheriff to try and reason with me as one of them snuck up on me. A bullet to the hip cut that shit off pretty quick. I was thirsty, hungry, and exhausted. My brain was hammering against my skull. I was low on ammo, and things seemed hopeless when I saw the first splash of blue and orange in the distance. The sun was coming up, and my heart began to race once again. What entity was going to come out? How many people was it going to kill? Questions like these zoomed around in my mind, new ones coming up before I could properly contemplate on the ones preceding them. But the fighting never stopped, even as morning arrived proper, revealing a scene of shattered windshields, splattered with blood, and broken but conscious bodies lying on the ground. They hadn't even bothered with evacuating the wounded. But nothing happened. The cave's insides were lit up by the rising sun, but nothing happened. No rampaging monstrosity, no abnormalities in reality, nothing. At first, I was worried that the father-son duo had figured out a way to complete the sacrifice, so I retreated to the second major turn in the cave, near the clearing that housed the pit. And what I saw there was the single most terrifying thing I've ever witnessed in my life. Both of them were fine, sitting in the corner with lifeless expressions on their faces. They understood it was morning, and had arrived at a certain realization much faster than I had. There was no monster in the black pit. The townspeople had been killing themselves over nothing. I don't remember much of what happened after that. I do know that the two of them were able to come out of their state of shock somewhat before staggering out and explaining to the others what had happened. I remember the looks of utter devastation that spread across the faces of those outside. The realization that they killed their own loved ones over a myth would lead to too much trauma in the town. They weren't the only ones in a daze. The pointless cruelty of it all affected me too. A lot. Some of them attempted to detain me, to question me on the events of the night, but I was able to give them the slip. Some of my contacts at Acme told me that the pit wasn't completely useless. It was a rip in reality that led to the other side of the world. Maybe that had something to do with how the myths originated, how it ended up with the most cruel form of ritual imaginable. I don't know. And it's not something I'd like to particularly think about. I often wonder about my actions that night. I wonder if I had done the right thing. Maybe sometimes the worst thing that you can do is open Pandora's box and find it completely empty.